Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling a scenario that is practically the stuff of nightmares for anyone involved in logistics, retail, or even just buying things online.
Oh, absolutely.
Picture this. You pay for goods, the contract is signed, everyone is happy, the money has left your account, and then before the goods actually get to you, they're destroyed.
The delivery truck catches fire, the warehouse floods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is the classic law school exam question that also happens to destroy real-world relationships, is the who is left holding the bag scenario.
It really is. And the key thing here, the twist, is that nobody did anything wrong.
Right. The seller didn't breach, the buyer didn't breach. It's just bad luck. But in the eyes of the law, bad luck has a price tag.
It certainly does.
So today, we're diving into the Uniform Commercial Code, specifically UCC Section 2509. The title is Risk of Loss in the Absence of Breach.
This is a fundamental section of sales law. It answers that critical question. Who bears the financial burden when goods are lost or damaged, assuming neither party is at fault?
So our mission today is surgical. We have the statute itself, UCC 2509, and a set of 5 specific study questions we need to answer. We're going to strip this statute down to the studs.
Yeah.
But before we get into the weeds, give us the roadmap. How does the UCC organize this chaos?
Well, we're going to organize this analysis exactly how the statute does, by looking at the location and the movement of the goods.
Okay.
If you look closely at the text, Section 2509 divides the commercial world into 3 distinct scenarios.
And what are those?
First, we have goods being shipped by a carrier. That's subsection 1. Second, goods held by a bailee without, that's subsection 2.
And the third?
And third, we have a catch-all for everything else, subsection 3.
And I know there's a subsection 4 that acts as a sort of referee for the whole thing, but let's start at the top. Subsection 1. This applies where the contract requires or authorizes the seller to ship the goods by a carrier.
Right. Think FedEx, UPS, or a massive cargo ship. This is your standard shipping scenario involving a third-party transporter.
So let's look at the first study question provided in our materials. Question A asks, under item A of subsection 1, when does the risk of loss shift from the seller to the buyer?
Okay, to answer that, we have to look at the rule in UCC 2509, 1A. This provision governs what we call a shipment contract.
And that's the default, right? If the contract doesn't specify a particular destination for delivery.
Exactly, it's the default rule. So the rule states that if the contract does not require the seller to deliver the goods at a particular destination, the risk of loss passes to the buyer when the goods are duly delivered to the carrier.
Let's analyze that element. Duly delivered to the carrier. What does that practically mean for the seller?
It means the seller has to put the goods in the possession of the carrier and make a reasonable contract for their transportation.
So once the seller hands the box to the trucking company and ensures it's addressed correctly, they're off the hook.
Pretty much. Wait, so the moment the seller hands the box to the trucking company, it's the buyer's problem?
Precisely. Even if the goods are still thousands of miles away from the buyer, once the seller duly delivers them to the carrier, the seller has completed their performance regarding risk.
So if the truck explodes 5 miles down the road?
The buyer still owes the full purchase price.
Wow. That feels incredibly risky for the buyer.
It does. And this statute also mentions something about under reservation. The text says this rule applies even if the shipment is under reservation. What's that about?
That references Section 2505. Under reservation essentially means the seller is holding on to the documents of title, like the bill of lading, to make sure they get paid.
Oh, so they ship the goods, but they hold the keys until the check clears.
Exactly. And the argument would be, hey, you kept the papers, so you kept the risk.
But the statute says no.
Right. The statute explicitly rejects that argument. It says that even if the seller holds the bill of lading for security, the risk of the goods burning up in transit still passed to the buyer the moment the carrier got them.
Okay, that seems to heavily favor the seller. But let's look at the flip side. This brings us to question B from our source material. Under item B of subsection 1, when does the risk of loss shift from the seller to the buyer?
Now we're looking at UCC 2509 1B. This applies when the contract does require the seller to deliver the goods at a particular destination. We call this a destination contract.
This sounds more like what a consumer expects. Get it to my house, safe and sound.
Exactly. And in this scenario, the risk transfer happens much later. The rule here has 3 distinct elements that must all be met for risk to pass.
Okay, let's break those elements down. What's the first one?
The first element is that the goods must be duly tendered at that destination.
And the second.
The second element is that the goods must be in the possession of the carrier at the time of that tender.
And what's the third element?
The third, and arguably most critical element, is that they must be tendered so as to enable the buyer to take delivery.
Let's unpack that third element. Enable the buyer to take delivery. Why is that wording so important?
Well, it prevents sham deliveries. A seller can't just dump the goods on a loading dock at 3 a.m. on a Sunday when the warehouse is locked and say, "I delivered."
Because that doesn't enable the buyer to take possession.
Right. The seller has to provide the necessary documents, maybe keys or access, and do it at a reasonable time.
So, to synthesize subsection 1, if it's a shipment contract, risk passes when the truck leaves the seller. If it's a destination contract, risk passes when the truck arrives at the buyer.
That is a crucial distinction. And remember, if the contract is silent, the law presumes it's a shipment contract. The default favors the seller.
Okay, let's move away from trucks and ships. Let's talk about things that sit still. This brings us to subsection 2. The text says this applies where goods are held by a bailee to be delivered without being moved.
Yeah, this is common in commercial agriculture or bulk commodities. You buy 50 tons of grain, but you don't move it to your garage. It just stays in the silo.
And you just get the paperwork saying you own it now. Okay, before we get to the rules, we need to define our terms clearly. Question C from our source material asks simply, what is meant by bailee, referred to in subsection 2?
So the statute itself doesn't offer a dictionary definition in this section, but we infer it from the context. A bailee, in this context, is a third party who is legally holding the goods.
Warehousing them.
Right, warehousing them, where the delivery is intended to occur without the goods physically moving to a new location.
So the bailee is the warehouse operator, the grain elevator owner, the storage facility. They aren't the buyer, and they aren't the seller.
Correct. They are the neutral keeper of the goods.
So if the goods aren't moving, how do we know when the risk moves? The statute seems to offer a menu of options here.
It does. Subsection 2 provides 3 different triggers. Risk passes to the buyer upon the occurrence of any one of these 3 events.
Let's walk through them using our elemental analysis approach. What's the first trigger? Item A.
Item A is the buyer's receipt of a negotiable document of title covering the goods.
Negotiable document. That's like a bearer bond, right? Whoever holds the paper owns the stuff.
Yes, exactly. The document is the goods. If I hand you that document, you now bear the risk instantly.
Okay. And the second trigger, item B.
Item B is acknowledgement by the bailee of the buyer's right to possession.
So this is when the warehouse manager calls you up and says,
okay, I recognize that these crates are yours now. That verbal or written acknowledgement shifts the risk.
And the third one brings us to a specific study question. Question D asks, what is meant by non-negotiable document of title, referred to in item C of subsection 2?
This is the third trigger, item C. It says risk passes after the buyer's receipt of a non-negotiable document of title or other written direction to deliver. But there's a huge caveat here.
What's the caveat?
The text explicitly references as provided in subsection 4B of section 2503.
So let's analyze the difference. What distinguishes the negotiable document in item A from the non-negotiable one in item C?
Well, a negotiable document controls the goods directly. A non-negotiable document is more like just an instruction. It's weaker.
Because it's weaker.
The risk transfer isn't instantaneous. The reference to section 2503 implies that passing a non-negotiable document doesn't shift risk until the buyer has had a reasonable time to present it to the bailee.
So if I hand you a negotiable document, risk passes now. If I hand you a non-negotiable document, risk passes eventually.
Correct. If the warehouse burns down 10 minutes after you get a non-negotiable document, the risk is likely still with me, the seller. You haven't had time to secure your goods.
Fascinating. The type of paper you use determines the speed of risk transfer. Right, we've done ships, we've done warehouses, now we have to do everything else. This is subsection 3.
The catch-all. The text says it applies in any case not within subsection 1 or 2. This covers most consumer transactions.
Buying a TV, buying groceries, buying a used car from a neighbor.
Right. And this section introduces a fascinating distinction based on who the seller is.
Yes. Subsection 3 hinges entirely on whether the seller is a merchant.
It's a critical distinction.
Okay, since we don't have a specific case like Smith v. Jones in our source file to illustrate this, I want us to construct a rigorous hypothetical to act as our case study. Let's apply this element by element.
Okay, I'm with you.
Let's imagine 2 scenarios involving, let's say, a high-end riding lawnmower.
Lawnmower, perfect.
Scenario A, I go to a home improvement megastore, definitely a merchant. I buy the mower. I pay for it. The clerk rolls it to the front of the store and says, here it is. It's yours.
Huh.
I say, great, I'll go get my truck and be right back.
Okay.
While I'm gone, a freak lightning strike hits the mower and destroys it.
Okay. Let's perform a formal elemental analysis on this based on subsection 3.
First, what are the legally dispositive facts regarding the parties?
The seller is the home improvement megastore. They deal in goods of this kind. Therefore, the seller is a merchant.
Second, what is the specific rule of law for a merchant seller under 25093?
The rule states, if the seller is a merchant, the risk of loss passes to the buyer on his receipt of the goods.
Now let's look at the elements. What is the key legal element we need to test here?
The element is receipt. In the UCC, receipt is a term of art. It means taking physical possession.
Let's apply the facts to that element. Did I, the buyer, have receipt?
No, you paid for it. You looked at it. But you walked away to get your truck. You did not take physical possession. The goods remained in the sphere of control of the merchant.
So, was the element of receipt met?
The element was not met.
And what is the conclusion?
Because receipt did not occur, the risk of loss never passed to the buyer. It remained with the merchant seller. The store pays for the lightning-struck mower, not you.
Okay, that feels fair. Now, scenario B. Exact same mower, exact same price. But this time, I'm buying it from my neighbor, Steve, at his garage sale.
Uh-oh.
I pay him. He points to the mower in his driveway and says, there it is, take it whenever. I say, great, I'll get my truck. I leave. Lightning strikes.
The facts have changed. Now, the seller is Steve. Steve is an accountant, not a lawnmower dealer. Therefore, the seller is a non-merchant.
So what is the rule of law for a non-merchant seller under subsection 3?
The rule states, otherwise meaning for non-merchants, the risk passes to the buyer on tender of delivery.
Tender of delivery, that sounds different from receipt. What are the elements of tender?
Tender essentially has two elements. First, the seller must put and hold conforming goods at the buyer's disposition. Second, the seller must give the buyer any notification reasonably necessary to take delivery.
So basically, here it is, come and get it.
That's the gist of it, yes.
Let's apply the facts to the element of tender.
Steve pointed to the driveway. He said, there it is. He made the goods available to you immediately. He did not block your access.
Was the element of tender met?
Yes, the element of tender was fully met.
Even though I didn't touch it?
That's
even though I didn't have receipt?
Correct. For a non-merchant, the law does not require receipt. It only requires tender.
And the conclusion?
The risk of loss passed to you the moment Steve tendered delivery. When the lightning struck 5 minutes later, it was your mower. You lose the money.
That is a visceral difference. The exact same accident results in a total loss for the store in scenario A, but a total loss for me, the buyer, in scenario B. Why does the law create this double standard?
Well, it's about reasonable expectations in insurance. A merchant is a professional. We expect them to have insurance and to maintain custody until the buyer actually walks out the door.
And a neighbor at a garage sale.
A neighbor isn't expected to watch over goods indefinitely once they've said it's yours.
That brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. We've covered carriers, bailies, and the catch-all, but there's a safety valve. Question E from our source asks, what is the effect of subsection 4?
Subsection 4 establishes the hierarchy of the rules. It tells us that everything we just discussed, subsections 1, 2, and 3, are subject to 3 specific things. These are the overrides.
Okay, what's the first override?
Contrary agreement. The UCC champions freedom of contract. If the buyer and seller write a contract that says risk passes when the moon is full, that controls. The statute only steps in if the contract is silent.
And the second override?
Sale on approval. This refers to Section 2327. If I take a guitar home to try it out for a week on approval, the risk usually stays with the seller until I actually accept it, even though I have physical possession.
And the third override. This seems like the big one.
Breach. This refers to Section 2510. Remember, the title of our deep dive is Risk of Loss in the Absence of Breach.
So what happens if there is a breach?
If someone breached the contract, say the goods were non-conforming, or the delivery was late, Section 2510 kicks in, it generally leaves the risk with the breaching party, regardless of where the goods are.
If you break the rules, you keep the risk.
You got it.
So subsection 4 basically says, check for a breach, a special trial period, or a contract clause first. If none of those exist, then and only then do you use the rules in 2509.
Precisely. It is the gatekeeper.
This has been a rigorous tour of the statute. We have dissected every subsection. Now, for the listeners trying to keep this straight, maybe they have an exam coming up or they just want to impress their shipping manager, We need to synthesize this.
Absolutely. You can't just guess at these problems. You need a structured approach.
Let's build a step-by-step diagnostic checklist for the listener. If they face a destroyed goods fact pattern, what is step 1?
Step 1, check for overrides. Subsection 4, you have to ask, is there a breach of contract? Is this a sale on approval? Is there a specific clause in the contract allocating risk?
And if the answer is yes to any of those,
Stop there. Apply those rules. If the answer is no, then you proceed to step 2.
what is step 2?
Step 2, check for carrier. Subsection 1, ask, is the seller required or authorized to ship the goods by a third-party carrier? If yes, determine if it's a shipment contract or destination contract.
And the rule for those.
If there is no specific destination required, risk passes on delivery to the carrier. If there is a particular destination required, risk passes on tender at that destination.
Okay. And if there is no carrier, what's step 3?
Step 3, check for Bailey. Subsection 2, ask, are the goods held by a third party to be delivered without moving? If yes, look for the paperwork.
Right. Negotiable document acknowledgement.
Or receipt of a non-negotiable document, but subject to that reasonable time wait.
And if none of those apply, step 4.
Step 4, the residual test. Subsection 3. If there's no carrier and no Bailey, you're in the catch-all. Look at the seller. Is the seller a merchant? Risk passes only on physical receipt by the buyer.
And if they're not a merchant,
Is the seller a non-merchant? Then risk passes on mere tender of delivery.
that is incredibly clear. We've mapped the exact moment responsibility shifts. It's funny, we think of ownership as this solid state thing. It's mine or it's yours.
Right.
But the UCC treats it more like a baton pass in a relay race.
It does. And if you drop the baton during the pass, it matters exactly where your hand was.
And it matters who you are. The distinction between the merchant and the non-merchant is something that really sticks with you.
It's the difference between consumer protection and, well, neighborly courtesy.
So next time you buy a used couch from a stranger online, remember,
Yeah.
once they say, come get it, the risk might just be yours, even if you haven't picked it up yet.
A sobering thought for the modern consumer.
Indeed. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep your receipts, check your shipping terms, and we will see you next time.